بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، صلى الله وسلم على سيد الأولين والآخرين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اهتدى بهديه واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. Now this book that was suggested that we go through is a book that is of huge importance, written by one of the major Imams of this Ummah, Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani alayhi rahmatullah, and the book is called BULUGH al Maram min Adillati al-Ahkam. Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar is from the scholars of Hadith, who was born in Egypt in 773 years after the Hijrah, and he was known for his knowledge of Hadith, but he was also a scholar of Fiqh, and he was also a judge for a period of time in Egypt and in Sham. And the brothers before would have classes on Bulugh al Maram by Shaikh Hassan Rashid. Hassan Rashid, his name is, yeah. And he would deliver it. And the classes were useful. I attended some of them, very useful. These classes won't be anything of that quality, but at least they're going to be in English for those who don't understand Arabic. They'll at least be able to understand something. And the knowledge of Hadith is extremely important, extremely vital. And the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and his words and his actions are legislation for us, just like the Quran is legislation. Just like the Quran has to be followed, the Prophet ﷺ has to be followed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about him, وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. He doesn't speak of his own accord, except everything is revelation revealed to him. So everything the Prophet ﷺ says is obligatory for us to follow. Now, the scholars of Hadith vary in their ways of writing books of Hadith, and the study of Hadith goes very well with the study of Fiqh. The study of Fiqh and the study of Hadith go very well together, because the majority of Fiqh comes from Hadith. The majority of Fiqh comes from Hadith, and it's important for a person to, as much as possible, understand the life of the Prophet ﷺ, how he acted, how he did things, how he behaved in varying situations. Very important. That's the only way a person can resemble the Prophet ﷺ. That's the only way a person can resemble the Prophet ﷺ, be more like the Prophet ﷺ. And that's what people want to see. That's what people want to see. If Muslims were resembling of the Prophet ﷺ in their words and their actions and their character and their worship, who would dislike Islam? It's impossible. Impossible. But the only way to go about that is for a person to learn the Prophet ﷺ's Sunnah. And one of the blessings that Allah has blessed this Ummah with is the preservation of the science of Hadith. Preserving the words and actions of the Prophet ﷺ in a strict manner, with rulings, with rules and guidelines governing the science of Hadith. What can truly be attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, what cannot. This is not known before. This is not known in the other religions. In the other religions, if it's in a book, there you go. That's what we have. The science of Hadith is very specific, very accurate, very precise. Not anyone can come and claim the Prophet ﷺ said this. You're caught out if you try that. You're caught out. And some of the scholars of Hadith say, if somebody in China said, the Prophet ﷺ said XYZ, and he was not truthful, the following morning in Iraq, people would be saying XYZ is a liar, XYZ is a liar. So the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is preserved. No one can come and say this is what the Prophet ﷺ said easily. It's not possible. And in fact, just like Allah preserved the Quran, Allah preserved the Sunnah. This is very important to understand. Just like Allah preserved the Quran, and Allah says in the Quran, "Inna nahnu nazzalna adh-dhikr wa inna lahu lahafidhun." We have sent down the revelation, and we are the ones who shall preserve it. Similarly, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ has been preserved exactly the same way. It's impossible for it to be tampered with. Impossible. Except that a person will be caught out, and the scholars of Hadith will catch it out. Allah's preserved it like that. Just like one of the ways that Allah's preserved the Quran is by people memorizing it letter for letter. Similarly, the science of Hadith has been preserved by Allah blessing us with scholars of Hadith. Scholars of Hadith. And this is a huge blessing. And this is why a person shouldn't differentiate in that regard between the Quran and between the Sunnah. In this regard, of course, there are differences in other ways. But in this regard, in regards of preservation, a person shouldn't distinguish. Some people might have a waswasa, a paranoia, and think, oh, what if this is not true? What if the Prophet ﷺ didn't really say abadan? No way. No way. If the Ummah has agreed this is a hadith, it's a hadith. If the Ummah agrees the Prophet ﷺ said this, he said it, without doubt. Because Allah has preserved the Sunnah just like He preserved the Quran. This is without a shadow of a doubt. Now, the scholars of Hadith vary in their ways, like we said, of writing their books of Hadith. And one of the ways, rather than us going into detail, one of the most important ways is to split up the chapters of the book into the chapters of fiqh, chapters of action. For example, tahara, wudu, using the siwak, ghusl, tayammum, and so on. Each of these are chapters, and all of the ahadith that are relevant to these chapters are placed under that chapter. And one of the first, if not the first, Imam who laid things out in this manner was Imam Abu Abdullah Malik ibn Anas ibn Malik ibn Abi Amir al-Asbahi alayhi rahmatullah, the Imam of Ahlul Hadith and the Imam of Medina, Al-Imam Malik ibn Anas, the famous Imam of Medina, born in 93 after the Hijrah. And the Prophet ﷺ says, people will travel distances to seek knowledge, and they will not find anyone more knowledgeable than the scholar of Medina. And some of the scholars say this hadith is referring to Al-Imam Malik ibn Anas. So he was an ocean in hadith, an Imam in hadith. And his famous book, the Muwatta of Malik, which he called the Muwatta, was split up into these chapters. So he'd start off with the chapter of Mawaqit Salah, the times of Salah, and then he would move on to the varying chapters. And each chapter he would mention it, the different narrations from himself to the Prophet ﷺ. حدثنا مالك حدثنا نافع حدثنا ابن عمر عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, and so on. Okay, Malik would say, Nafi' told me, who Ibn Umar told him, the Prophet ﷺ told him, and so on. From him to the Prophet ﷺ. And the chains of Malik are from the most authentic. From the most authentic. Because he was close to the Prophet ﷺ. And he was in Medina, the land of the Prophet ﷺ. And he was a student of some of the major tabi'een, like Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, and Nafi', Mawla ibn Umar, who was a student of Abdullah ibn Umar, and other Imams of the tabi'een. So he's very close to the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And it's narrated that somebody came to Malik and said to him, you have your Muwatta, other scholars also and other people have collected books like yours, so this is something that's becoming overcrowded. Yeah? He said, يَبْقَى مَا كَانَ لِلَّهِ, what was done for the sake of Allah will remain. And today we know of no other Muwatta except the Muwatta of Malik. All of them disappeared. And they say there were dozens of similar books in his time. Nothing remained. except what we have now, or at least nothing is known to us except what we have now. That's the motto of Malik. And in this shows the sincerity of the scholars of Hadith. And it's vital that before a person begins studying Hadith especially, or begins studying Fiqh, that a person is careful of doing it for several dangerous intentions. One is to show off, very dangerous. One is to argue and dispute and debate. It's another dangerous intention. And the Prophet ﷺ says in the Hadith, "Man ta'allama al-ilm liyumari bihi as-sufaha, aw liyubahi bihi al-ulama, aw liyukhayyara bihi al-majalis, fan-nar an-nar." Whoever studies this knowledge in order to argue with the ignorant, or in order to show off to the scholars, or in order to be given positions in gatherings and have finger pointed at him, فَالنَّارَ النَّارِ, the hellfire, the hellfire. Meaning it's dangerous for a person to study these things with bad intentions. And how many people study simply to prove a point to someone? I just want to argue with him. I want to prove him wrong. It's not a good intention. It's not a good intention. The intention is to act. The intention is to act. What will stay is action. What will stay is action. This knowledge will become, may Allah protect us and forgive us, because this knowledge on the Day of Judgment will either be for us or against us. Could be against us. And some of the poets say, if you do not act upon the knowledge that you have, you are better off not having known it in the first place. On the Day of Judgment, at least you'll be ignorant. At least you'll be ignorant. Not like the one who has knowledge. And it's said to him, you knew. You have no excuse. You knew this, you knew this, you knew this. You didn't act. So this is a big thing that a person has to always be careful of. The intention is sound. And the best intention is, Ahmad ibn Hanbal was asked, how does a person have sincere intention for studying knowledge? He said, lifting ignorance from yourself and from others. And the third is acting. One, you learn it to act. Very important to act. Everything we learn, we act. And it's narrated from Ahmad ibn Hanbal that he said, not a narration that I heard except I acted upon it. Anything I hear, I act. To the extent that once he had hijama, he had cupping done, not because he wanted to do it, just because it's narrated the Prophet ﷺ did it, and he gave the person who did it for him a payment. He said, here you go, have it, following the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. For everything that could be done, could be followed, they would follow it. The second thing is lifting ignorance of oneself. And ignorance is a disease that is very dangerous, because it causes people to go far astray. And a person doesn't know what to do in different situations. Okay, now this situation that's appeared, what do I do? I'm in this situation, how do I act? What do I say? And the majority of people get things wrong because of this. But one whose knowledge is sound usually minimizes error, minimizes the errors they make. And two, lifting ignorance from others, especially the family members, those close by and family members and so on. And the more enlightened a society is, and a community is, and a family is, the better the community life is. The better life is, rather than people's lives being built on ignorance. Anyway, like we said, these are some of the books of Hadith. Now, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, just like some of the Imams before him, focused on gathering the Ahadith which gave us, or which were relied upon by the scholars to give rulings. So we said this is the link between Fiqh and Hadith, especially this Ahadith al-Ahkam. What are the Ahadith that the scholars usually relied upon in order to come up with their rulings? Because the scholars don't just speak from their own opinions, and they don't play guesswork. They take it from the Quran, or they take it from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. These are the two foundations, and everything is built upon those two. So which ahadith are the most relied upon in order for the scholars to give their varying rulings? These ahadith were gathered in books that are known as Ahadith al-Ahkam. Kutub Ahadith al-Ahkam, the books of ahadith which concern themselves about ahkam, rulings, Ahkam are rulings. From the famous ones were Al-Muntaqa by Al-Majd ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah. He was the grandfather of the famous Imam, Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah that we know. His grandfather was from the most famous Imams of the Hanbali madhab. And he gathered a book similar to this one, slightly bigger than this one, which contained the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which the scholars relied upon to give their rulings. For example, a person cannot make wudu except with water that is tahur, as we studied in Fiqh. Where does this come from? Why not? Why limit it to water? Water and soap is also clean, juice can be clean, and so. Why limit it to water? Because the Prophet ﷺ, for example, states in a hadith, وَالطَّهُورُ مَاءُهُ وَالْحِلُّ مَيْتَةُ, or in the Quran, وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً طَهُورًا وَيُنَزِّلُ عَلَيْكُم مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً لِيُطَهِّرَكُم بِهِ, and so on. And of course the consensus of the scholars is that you can only make wudu with water. Again, tayammum. Why can we only make tayammum with certain things? Why not other things? Here's the reference. Ghusl. Why is ghusl like this? Here's the reference. Why is washing the hands at the beginning of wudu not wajib? Why is washing the face wajib? Here's the reference. And so on. And so on. Now this really advised that we get this. And it'd be even more helpful while we're going through it every Sunday in the classes. And even sitting with yourself reading. Very, very useful book. Very useful book. Now, the scholars of Hadith usually don't make this the first book to study. They make the 40 Hadith of An-Nawawi the first book. And we've gone through the Hadith of that. And we said it's important that we revise those Hadith. The second level is usually Umdatul Ahkam by Al-Hafidh Abdul Ghani Al-Maqdisi. And he gathered exactly the same thing. Rulings, Hadith which had rulings in. Very much smaller book, about 420 Hadith. But he only put in the Hadith that were narrated by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. Only. And so we can assure its authenticity. Whereas BULUGH al Maram, this book of Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar, he did not put a condition that every hadith is authentic. Not necessarily. The vast majority of hadith are authentic without doubt. But some of them are disputed. Some scholars don't consider them authentic. And others are definitely not authentic, agreed upon. But they're still put in there because they might be used by the scholars in certain ways. And weak hadith have their uses at times, if they're not too weak, by the scholars. Okay. Now, we have two options. We'll see what the brothers think. We either have the option of going through the book of Tahara, the book of Salah, the book of Siyam, similarly, in a similar fashion that we did with Fiqh, with Umdat al-Fiqh, so that we have got the Fiqh, now we have the evidences of that Fiqh, or we can start with a varying topic, which is Kitab al-Jami', a comprehensive book which talks about kindness and joining the ties of relationship and manners and piety and dua and so on, because that's different to what we usually do, and we usually tend to focus on fiqh. What do people think?
I think the second one is more general, isn't it?
The second one is more general, character and so on, and it's slightly different from what we've done. And the first one will be sort of something that will go together with the fiqh, and it'll be a good revision for the fiqh also, so that it's not forgotten. It depends. People usually are bored of fiqh, so it's up to you. What do people think?
I think the first one.
The first option?
Yeah.
First option is fine?
Yeah. But a lot of the main students that were in the fiqh are not here present.
They were fasting today, they're eating, but they're hearing us. And I know they want the first option as well.
Some of them are not here at all, you see.
Okay.
Like Asif,
yes, you're right.
Eman's not here, my son.
Yeah.
My other sons are not here.
Yes.
And there's a few others as well that are missing.
Okay, I mean, we can, there's no harm in starting first 2 or 3 hadith. We'll have a look at them. And then if people, we can message them on the WhatsApp group and ask people. If people want to take the second option, we'll continue next week with that. Otherwise we'll continue as well. But we'll start off with the chapter of Tahara. At least then we can have a short introduction. Now, the author rahimahullah says, this is a concise book comprising the hadith evidence sources of the Sharia rulings, as we've just mentioned, which he compiled, and it may assist the beginner, student, and the learned one in seeking knowledge, and so on. Like we said, it's vital to go through this. And one of the major things that we learn when going through the hadith of ahkam is that coming up with rulings is not as easy as some people think it is. Some people think that by reading a hadith, it can give you a ruling automatically, which is wrong. It's a big mistake. Who told you this hadith is not abrogated? Who told you the hadith is not weak? Who told you the hadith does not have another hadith which explains it? Who told you that the scholars did not interpret the hadith to mean something different? Very important. And this is why they tell a story of somebody who was studying Sahih Muslim or Sahih Bukhari, and he came across the chapter of killing dogs. Chapter of killing the dogs. So they went out, studied the chapter, and started throwing the bullets. Next week came back, and it was the chapter of abrogating the ruling of killing dogs. So the ruling was abrogated. But because these people rushed, they didn't know that. Had you listened to a scholar, he would have told you, this is abrogated, by the way. This is abrogated. This is weak, by the way. Okay. This means this, by the way. It doesn't mean that some people understand it this, etc. Very important, very important.
When you say abrogated, that means cancelled.
Cancelled out. Abrogated means cancelled out. It was initially a ruling, then it was cancelled out afterwards, no longer a ruling, and it was replaced by something else. That's what abrogated means. Of course, abrogating rulings only happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. That can no longer happen now, because revelation is finished now. But it happened quite a bit in the early stages, and at times in some of the latter stages of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So this is very important, and this is one of the things one learns, because you read a hadith and you think a ruling is this, then it's explained and said, no, this means this. You think, oh, subhanallah, I thought it meant this. I thought it meant this. And this is very important. This is why a person doesn't rush and speak quickly and so on, unless a scholar has approved, a person of knowledge has approved. Because the person of knowledge knows, is it abrogated, is it weak, and etc. And this is vital. This is very important. Now, why is this book considered, for at least somebody in the initial stages of their study of knowledge, more important than books like Sahih al-Bukhari and books like Sahih Muslim? Why? One, because they have gathered specific ahadith of specific topics and specific ahadith which were considered principles and rulings relied upon by the scholars of Sharia. That's the first thing. Two, because it's more concise and it's been explained in an easier manner and so on. Whereas Sahih Bukhari is more advanced. It's more advanced. I know Sahih Bukhari is like a reference for everyone, and it's a very important reference, and Sahih Muslim also. That doesn't mean a person immediately jumps to that. Just like the one who wants to start studying fiqh and jumps into Al-Mughni by Ibn Qudama, rahimahullah. It doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. Who here does a PhD without having an A-level or a degree? So how can a person begin with Sahih Bukhari without having studied Umdat al-Ahkam, BULUGH al Maram, and Al-Arba'in al-Nawawi, and so on? And we will find something like this is more useful for us, because this is action. These are hadith of action and rulings. Sahih Bukhari is more, for example, Sahih Bukhari is an example only. It's more encompassing. More encompassing. Okay. Now, one of the good things about this book is that Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar in the end mentions Sahahahu al-Hakim. Sahaha ibn Hibban. It was authenticated by Al-Hakim. This hadith authenticated by Ibn Ma'in. This hadith authenticated by Al-Bukhari. And so on. He mentions you a reference, at least you have an idea. Where is this hadith in regards to authenticity? Do we rely upon this? Do we act upon this? And so on. It gives an idea, a good idea. If it's in Al-Bukhari or if it's in Muslim, then there's no question. We don't need to discuss is it authentic or not. It's without doubt authentic. Without doubt authentic. However, other hadith may not necessarily be. So Al-Hafidh helps us by clarifying whether it's authentic or not. The most relied upon, of course, books of hadith are 6 or 7. What are they? Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, known as the Sahihain. Then the Sunan of Abi Dawood and At-Tirmidhi and Nasa'i and Ibn Majah. These 4. And the 7th, Ibn Hajar sometimes refers to the 7 books of hadith as As-Sab'ah, the 7. Narrated by the 7. Who's the 7th one? We just mentioned 6. Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And he had his Musnad. Very large Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And the Musnad is different from the others in that the Musnad is arranged according to what? Names of the Sahaba. So he has Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, all of the hadith narrated by Abu Bakr. Musnad Abu Hurairah, all the hadith narrated by Abu Hurairah, etc. Whereas this book, and Sahih Bukhari, and Sahih Muslim, and the Sunnah are not like that. Chapter of Bad'ul al-Wahy, the beginning of revelation. All the hadith relevant to that topic, etc. Another one of the most famous books relied upon and used here is the Muwatta of Malik. And some of the others, Imams of Hadith, have their books also, like Al-Bayhaqi and Al-Daraqutni and Al-Bazzar. All of them are major scholars of Hadith. طيب. In the beginning of this book, he has around 30 or 40 names of different scholars of Hadith, and he gives a brief sort of biography of who they are and so on. It's nice if a person can get this book and have a read of them. That'll be useful. He says, Rahimahullah, Kitab al-Tahara, the book of purification. Babul Miyah, chapter 1, water. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في البحر. Now this is one of the benefits of studying hadith is that you repeat the name of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, which means that you repeat sending salutations upon him صلى الله عليه وسلم. And so that's something that is not to be forgotten. هو الطهور ماؤه الحل ميتته أخرجه الأربعة وغيره وصححه ابن خزيمة والترمذي وأخرجه مالك والشافعي وأحمد. Abu Hurairah رضي الله عنه, and we said his full name is, or his real name is, 1 month and it's gone out the window. Abdurrahman ibn Sakhr. Abdurrahman ibn Sakhr رضي الله عنه. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said regarding the sea, its water is tahur, it's purifying, and its dead is lawful to eat, i.e. its dead animals is lawful to eat. هو الطهور ماؤه الحل ميتته. The story behind this hadith is that some of the companions said, O Messenger of Allah, we travel by sea and we only have sufficient water to drink. Can we make wudu using sea water? So the Prophet ﷺ said, هو الطهور ماؤه الحل ميتته. Its water is purifying and its dead is lawful, permissible to eat. And that's a principle. Everything from the sea that lives in the sea, all of its life, is permissible to eat. Everything in the sea is permissible to eat. And the second principle is that water is purifying and cleans. And that's the standard position of water. Should a person question, what if this water is dirty? What if this water is dodgy? No question. The water is pure. Unless you are certain something's up with it, somebody's urinated in it, somebody's thrown up in it, and so on, then there's a problem. Otherwise, water that is there is pure. Water in its natural state is pure and it's purifying. You can use it to wash your clothes, you can use it to make wudu with, and so on. all water in its natural state, even if it is different, tastes differently, or it looks differently, so such as seawater is salty, still it's tahur. Some water might be sugary, naturally sugary, not somebody's changed it and made it sugary, naturally a certain colour. All of that is pure. All of that is pure and can be used for water. And like we said, everything in the sea is permissible to eat. Everything in the sea is permissible to eat. Meaning what? Meaning it's permissible to eat dead, without any slaughtering, without anything like that. A person finds a fish that's died just by the side of the beach. Is that permissible to eat? Definitely. What if it hasn't been slaughtered, no one said Bismillah and so on? Permissible to eat. Permissible to eat. Because it's from the living creatures of the sea. Here we're talking about creatures that live in the sea. Live in the sea all the time. There are details of other creatures that sometimes live in the sea, partly on land and so on, which we'll come on to another time. But those that live in the sea all the time are permissible to eat. Are permissible to eat, whether they're in a Muslim land, a non-Muslim land, whatever the circumstances, they're permissible to eat, regardless of how they've died, who killed them, and so on. وعن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الماء طهور لا ينجسه شيء أخرجه الثلاثة وصححه أحمد. Narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri رضي الله عنه. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, water is tahur, nothing can make it impure. Water is tahur. Water is tahur, it's pure, nothing can make it impure. And this hadith is specified by another narration, which is the following narration. عن أبي أمامة الباهلي رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الماء لا ينجسه شيء إلا ما غلب على ريحه وطعمه ولونه. And narrated Abu Umamah رضي الله عنه, Allah's Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم said, water cannot be rendered impure by anything except something which changes its smell, taste and colour. So these two hadith we've mentioned have to be put together. One hadith says nothing can make it impure. Nothing. If we just had a look at that hadith, that would mean what? Even if somebody urinated in it, even if somebody had blood flowing into it, even if somebody threw up into it, even if all of the impurities of the dunya fell into it, it would still be pure. Is that correct? No, it's not correct. It's not correct. And so it's specified by the following narration. Even though the following narration is not authentic, because the scholars of hadith considered it weak, and he mentions here ضعفه Abu Hatim. Abu Hatim, one of the major scholars of hadith, considered this weak, but the ummah agreed that this hadith is applicable. Yeah, applicable. Meaning its ruling is valid. Sometimes a hadith is weak. Does that mean necessarily that the ruling mentioned in the hadith is not applicable? No, that's not true. That's not true. Does it mean because a hadith is weak, we should do the opposite of the hadith? No, not necessarily. Some hadith talk about the importance of obeying the parents and treating them kindly, and they're weak hadith. So should we do the opposite? No, of course not. Yeah, so some hadith are weak in narration, but authentic in meaning. Is that clear? The meaning is correct. Even though the hadith is not correct, the meaning is correct. And this is one of them. The narration isn't authentic, but the meaning is correct. Meaning, if water is changed in its color or taste or smell, then it's no longer tahur. It's no longer pure. For example, we have amounts of blood dripping into a container of water. Small amounts of blood drip into a container of water. Then, and there's no change of color at all. What do we say about this? Pure. Yeah? So far it's pure. Because there's no change of color, no change of smell, no change of taste. So the water is pure. Amounts of urine or blood go into a container of water and change its color. You can see colors change now. Impure. Okay? Impure. A slight distinction will come later on large amounts of water and small amounts of water. But this is the general principle. If water hasn't been changed, then it's pure, it can be used. If you are sure it has been changed, this is very important. Some people have an issue of waswasa. Or maybe my trousers are not clean. Maybe the floor is not clean. Maybe it's clean. Alhamdulillah, it's clean. The clothes are clean, the ground is clean, water is clean, everything is clean. Alhamdulillah. Everything's clean unless you have a clear-cut proof to prove otherwise. You saw something impure? Yes. Okay, now it's not pure. Now it's not pure. Otherwise it's pure. This is important. Some people are shocked when you pray outside on the street. Maybe it's not pure. Maybe a dog urinated. Okay, did you see the dog? No. Okay, so where's the concern? There's no concern. Yeah? And this is an important principle. Alhamdulillah, it's a blessing. The asl is everything is pure except what is clearly proven. Except what's clearly proven. عن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما. This is hadith number 4. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا كان الماء قلتين لم يحمل الخبث إذا بلغ الماء قلتين لم يحمل الخبث. If there is enough water to fill 2 pots, it carries no impurity. It carries no impurity. So we have now 3 ahadith. One says water is always pure. Always. One says water is pure so long as it doesn't change taste, color or smell. One says water is pure if it's more than 2 pots. Otherwise it's impure. What does this mean? I have a small glass of water and a drop of urine falls into this water. Is this a large amount of water or a small amount of water? It's a small amount of water. So therefore the water is impure, according to the majority of scholars. Do we need to look at whether the color has changed or the smell has changed and so on? We don't need to look because it's a small amount of water. It's a small amount of water. And the Prophet ﷺ says, if water reaches 2 pots, قُلَّتَيْن, which is roughly 200 liters. So it's a large amount of water. Roughly 200 liters, which is quite a large amount of water. If water is that large in amount, it does not carry the impurity. What does that mean? If it is less than that, it carries the impurity. Okay, it carries the impurity. So small amounts of water, if an impurity falls into it, then a person needs to avoid that. And if it's a large amount of water, such as a swimming pool, or such as in a river, sea, a tap of course, running taps like what we have now, all of that, the water is pure. Large amounts of water, the water is pure. Small amounts of water, it should be avoided. I know there's a slight difference of opinion on this issue, but so that we don't confuse ourselves, this is the general principle, and it's the opinion of the majority of scholars. So if water is in small amounts, a person needs to avoid that. Okay? You see, for example, a bowl of water. Somebody has a runny nose and a bleeding nose, and some of that falls into the water. Brush that aside. Leave that water aside. Use other water. Especially in our time, water is easily available. Alhamdulillah. Very easy to avoid that and move on. Hadith number 5. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يغتسل أحدكم في الماء الدائم وهو جنوب. None of you should take a bath in stagnant water while he is sexually impure. Junub means sexual impurity. Someone who's junub, can they pray? No. If they make wudu, can they pray? No. What's required? Ghusl. You need to make ghusl, then they pray. That's the difference between a major impurity and a minor impurity. Junub is someone who is in a state of major impurity, and they need to make ghusl. And we went through already the rulings of ghusl in using al-Fiqh, and we'll go cover it soon inshallah. But the command here is, if it is water that is stagnant, meaning still, water still, not moving. Water is still and not moving. And you are in a state of major impurity. The Prophet ﷺ says not to go into that water that is still. Why? Because there are varying explanations. Some of the scholars say, because once you go into that, no one else is going to want to use that water. And similarly, some of them say, once you have gone in, the next person cannot make wudu from it, because you've now changed the water from tahur to tahir. And again, alhamdulillah, I don't think most of us will face these situations anyway, because ghusl and wudu and so on, all of it is done using taps, showers and taps, and that's a huge blessing. However, if this happens and the person doesn't go in, that means if it's running water, can you go in? Yes. If it's running water, it's not a problem. Al-Bukhari has, none of you should urinate in stagnant water that is not flowing, then take a bath in it. And Muslim has from it, i.e. take a bath from the water. And Abu Dawood has, one should not take a bath in it from sexual impurity. These are varying narrations from the same hadith with this same meaning. A person doesn't urinate, of course, in stagnant water. And a person doesn't go in with a major sexual impurity. Rather, a person does ghusl using runny water and so on. These are hadith are clear. حديث number 6 عن رجل صاحب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال نهى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أن تغتسل المرأة بفضل الرجل أو الرجل بفضل المرأة وليغترفا جميعا. A man who accompanied the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم narrates. Is this not a problem? Because in hadith we need to know who the narrators are. We need to know who the narrators of hadith are. If I say to you, somebody told me that this happened yesterday, do you know who somebody is? You don't know who somebody is. So do you know, is this person truthful? Is he not truthful? Does he exaggerate? Does he not exaggerate? Does he forget easily? Does he not forget? You don't know. So can you rely on such a statement? You can't rely on it, especially in the science of hadith. But here the hadith says, a man who accompanied the Prophet ﷺ. Do we know who the man is? We don't know. So can we rely on this narration? Why? Why can we?
You can compare it to other hadith that's already sahih. And if the wording might be the same, you can say that that's...
Assuming this is the only narration. There is something in this hadith which makes it very clear that we can rely upon it. A man who accompanied the Prophet ﷺ.
It's a Sahabi.
It's a Sahabi. Does it matter who the Sahabi is? No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who the Sahabi is, because the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ are all trustworthy and all accepted, and their words are accepted. This is why it doesn't matter whether we know who the Sahabi is or not. But let's say somebody in the 4th or 5th generation said, a man told me. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Al-Bayhaqi, Al-Tirmidhi says, a man told me. Is the man that told Ahmad or the man that told Al-Tirmidhi a Sahabi? No. Ahmad didn't meet the Sahaba, nor did Al-Tirmidhi, and so on. And therefore, can we rely on this? No, it's not sufficient. But in this case, it's sufficient, because it doesn't matter who the companion is. Hadith is valid. Narrated, the Prophet ﷺ said, or the Prophet ﷺ forbade
50 seconds.
For Isha?
Yeah, for Azan to take
for the Adhan of Isha, no problem, inshallah. Forbade a woman from bathing with the water left over by a man, and a man from bathing with the water left over by a woman, and instead they should both scoop up handfuls of the water together. What time is the Jama'ah? 15:30?
No, 15. 10:15.
Oh, is it 10:15?
5 minutes.
Okay, mashallah, nice and early. طيب. Khalas, we'll take this hadith and the one after it, because the meaning is closely linked. In fact, we'll take it next week, inshallah. We'll take these hadith next week. This hadith, like we said, the Prophet ﷺ prohibited for a man to use the water left behind by a woman. A woman takes a shower and leaves water behind. A man can't now come and use that water for ghusl. And same with the opposite way around. We'll see whether this ruling applies, how it applies. Is there another hadith to oppose it and mean something different? And we'll come on to the views of the fuqaha in understanding this hadith. والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. And if we can grab this book from one of the shops, and bring it next week, inshallah, that'll be useful. We can at least follow along with the class, take notes and whatever else. There'll be a lot of benefits. Barakallahu fikum.